This episode of the Lutheran Cartographer is brought to you by Audible. Get a free trial offer along with a free audiobook at lutherancartographer.com/audible. The Lutheran Cartographer, episode 27. Welcome to the Lutheran Cartographer, the podcast where we explore what it's like to be Lutheran in different places. Today we are joined by Jeremy Lamont. He is a member of Grace Lutheran Church and School in Sandy, Utah, right outside of Salt Lake, and serves on their board of directors. Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Nicholas, thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit about you, your background, and how you ended up in Utah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I am a son of the great state of Utah, born in a little college town called Logan in the northernmost part of Utah. Utah is shaped a little bit like a fat letter L, I guess, and I'm up there at the top of the L. I live in Salt Lake City, or in a suburb of Salt Lake at this point, and that's sort of there's a lot of higher education, moving for school and work and those kinds of things, just kind of drawn to the city as people are. But that's how I'm located here physically. Spiritually, I am, talked about this a little bit beforehand, but I am an adult convert from Mormonism. So I am a member and blessed son of God in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. But it's been a long and weird road, and I sort of fell, as they say, backwards into it without really any any recognizance of my own. But here I am, and talking to you today, and I'm thrilled to be doing so.
And it's good to have you. Could you give our listeners just a brief sketch of how you came to the LCMS?
Sure, absolutely. So I am the beneficiary of, I guess, what you could call spousal evangelism. So I'm a divorced dad of two, but when I was dating my future wife, she was born and raised in the Missouri Synod, and I had lately come from, like I said, Mormonism. Being born and raised in Utah, you have a pretty good chance of going that way. And so she said, well, if we're going to date, you're going to come to my congregation. And I said, okay, sure. And I did so, and it was about, that would have been in 1999, or right before 2000. And so I have been in attendance more or less at a Missouri Synod church for going on about 20 years now. However, my actual baptism and confirmation are much more recent. I've actually been an adult convert since 2018, I think. So fairly recent, but I'm a lifelong citizen of Utah, and I've actually been at my church for quite a while. But it's only fairly lately in my life that I have come to really understand the significance of the Orthodox faith, as it were.
Excellent. So tell us a little bit more about your experience in Utah in terms of what you like best about it, and especially where you are now in Sandy.
Absolutely. So Salt Lake City, if you've ever seen the photos of it, one of the things, and I know that on this program, a lot of folks immediately will go to sort of the geography, and I have to do the same thing here. We are at the foot of kind of a leg of the Rocky Mountains. There's a kind of a north-south running mountain front that's called the Wasatch Front, and that's kind of where the population center is in the state of Utah, and everybody is nestled right up against the foot of these mountains. So one of the cool things about Salt Lake and the surrounding area is that you are about 30 minutes from, you've probably heard of Park City, you've probably heard of the Sundance Film Festival and all the ski resorts that we have here, and the rich and famous who fly in and, kind of snowbird here and such. So we are within a pretty short drive to, in the wintertime, of course, skiing and snow sports, sledding, in the summertime, hiking, ziplining, boating. But you've probably also seen, when you think of Utah, the stone arches and canyonlands and the big stone pillars. And that is to the south, but, more of a drive, but not, it's a good day trip to the south. We have a pretty good little metro area here, so you can, kind of like some of your other guests, we're sort of a medium-sized city where we get some of the amenities that you would expect from a larger metropolitan zone, but we're still sort of, kind of nestled away, just a little mountain town here. And I got to say, I love the mountains. The mountains are in me the way that, some people live near the ocean, and the ocean is in their blood. Man, I am a mountain man. And when I go to the Midwest, or when I go somewhere where there's no mountains, I'm just lost. It's like this big empty canvas on the horizon, and I'm like, I don't know where I am. My entire existence is oriented on those mountains. So that is absolutely one of the things that I adore here. People-wise, the culture here is different, I think, than you get in a lot of places. I love the folks. There's just a lot to like in Utah, and really, I think about, I could live other places. I could, but I don't know if I really want to. So that's Salt Lake for me. That's Utah.
Excellent. What are some of the other things beyond the geography and the people that you really enjoy about being there?
One thing that is kind of nice, and it's fun to be proud of the place that you're from. Utah is kind of this interesting little geographic crossroads. We have the West Coast. You're there in the Pacific Northwest. We've got California just to the left of us, so to speak. We've got all of the Chicago and Texas. We're sort of right in the middle of this area, and we are also an interesting little tech hub. You may have heard of, maybe not, I don't know, maybe nobody else has heard this, but we have something called the Silicon Slopes. You've got Silicon Valley in California. We have sort of styled ourselves to be the Silicon Slopes. We've got, really, really big and famous technology companies. Adobe has a presence here. Lots of credit card companies, lots of programming, software development happens here. We also have the University of Utah, which is a big medical research school. We've got the Huntsman Cancer Institute. Lots of healthcare and medicine going on here. Speaking of, you can't mention University of Utah without also mentioning BYU, and if people out there are into college sports, I guess those things mean something to those folks as well. I'm not so much into that myself, but we get to have a lot of big important stuff here without having to be in a big, super populous place elsewhere. So you kind of get a little bit of everything in Utah. And I think people are starting to discover us. We have a lot of immigration here from the West Coast, and people do come here, and I think they tend to set up homestead and stay. But it still is just a really great little hub of activity, both, the natural world, the unnatural world, human development and things like that, all of those things. And it really is just a great place to situate yourself.
Excellent. All right, so we've talked about the good things. Let's talk about the flip side. What are some of the challenges about being in that area?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing, and I guess I'm going to go back to geography for just a minute, because after painting this beautiful picture for you, one thing that we have come to sort of learn in the last several years here in Salt Lake Valley in particular is that although we are a pristine, nice little mountain town, it turns out that we are in a bowl valley. We just got mountains sort of all around us, and what that means is that in wintertime, we end up with a lot of pollution that somehow creates... Normally, pollution will be blown out of your area by the wind. Well, what happens here is it blows over the top and creates like this cold air dome that traps everything on the inside. So I am a little bit abashed to say that on our worst days, Salt Lake City somehow has some of the worst air on certain days in the entire country, even over places like LA, because we're in this little natural dome. And I think that is like one of our major problems here. Like we're still trying to figure that out and to deal with that. And that's probably the one thing that I have to kind of like dig my toe in the dirt a little bit and say, yeah, we kind of do have this thing going on. Apart from that, challenge-wise, the other thing I'm gonna throw you a little curveball here. Yard care is a lot more difficult in Utah because climate-wise, Utah is a little bit too cold in the winter and a little bit too hot in the summer, and so all of those nice plants and nice grasses and shrubs and things that you want to do your landscaping with that work everywhere else in the country don't really work here. So one source of ongoing consternation for me is that I just cannot find the right plants to put in my yard because they burn up in the summer and they freeze out in the winter, and it's vexing. Nicholas, it is That is like for me like the main. I can't with that. I just
Your
can't.
main cross that
It
you're
is. It
bearing.
really is the one. I'm bearing that one every year. Like I've probably got the worst yard in my neighborhood, and I've come to accept it. But I would say that those primarily are probably the two things that really grind my gears the most. That's probably not as interesting as maybe you had expected, but those are my things here.
Absolutely. So one thing I do want to ask about that perhaps isn't a challenge at all for you because you're from that area, but one thing I've heard from other people who are, for example, Roman Catholics who are living in Utah. One of my good friends is a Roman Catholic, and he and his family had a lot of difficulty because they weren't Mormons.
Hmm.
What do you hear that complaint from other people around you, or is that not really something that you face or others face as a challenge?
I believe they do, and in fact, I know that in one of your past episodes, there was a pastor that you were talking to who was I can't remember where he was, but he said that it was the gentleman who runs the Lutheran B&B had said that he actually passed through here, and we do have some Lutheran congregations here. So in locally, and I'll just kind of work my way around to answering your question here, but as far as Lutheranism, we do have a little knot of Lutherans here. We have several LCMS congregations. We have a pretty good, robust circuit here. We have a couple of Wisconsin Synod, a couple of Wells congregations, and we have one ELS congregation here. But we are by far, the minority here. And your Roman Catholic friends, I believe they are definitely on to something. I think that Utah is interesting because it is a Mormon majority. The LDS Church is involved directly or indirectly in a lot of the policy setting and in the politics, and people will live their faith, whatever that may be, and so that can sometimes be a little bit trying for people who do not subscribe to that. Having been born and raised in the Mormon Church, I also saw that I think there is a tendency on both sides to kind of say like, well, these other people, and folks get a little upset about, say, for example, tight liquor laws or things like that. I feel like there is a tendency to just get a little bit of a chip on your shoulder, kind of in whatever circumstance you may find yourself. I feel like when you are in Rome, you do as the Romans do, and this is definitely not the kind of culture that you get in. I mean, I know you've even talked about this for yourself. Being in the Pacific Northwest, you have a lot of essentially neo-paganism, right? Like people who are not faithful, who will kind of put their belief into whatever thing. In a way, we here in Utah are essentially living in more or less a mission field of moral pagans, essentially. Mormon people are awesome. They're great. They have somewhat, as pagan people are given to have God's law, they don't have the full picture of the gospel, and there are some other problems with Mormonism as well. But one thing that you can say about them is they are absolutely courteous. They are guided by their particular moral compass, and take that for what it's worth. I find that it only really galls you as much as you allow it to. The interesting thing about it, and I don't think a lot of people realize this, is that Mormons are not a simple majority in Utah anymore. It's probably about 40%. I think the last statistic I saw was that it's about 40% Mormon, and then 60% is kind of everybody else. Nobody else is as big as that demographic, but they themselves comprise the largest core group of people. So I don't find it particularly difficult. It is a little bit difficult sometimes to be surrounded by people who sort of believe that they are Christian and don't really realize that they're not actually, and it's really difficult to communicate that. And so that is a challenge for Lutherans and Christians here in Salt Lake and in Utah at large. And you've probably seen on YouTube and in various outlets where people are like, oh, this is how we minister to Mormons, and it does present a little bit of a challenge. And you can decide to let that get to you or not. And I can't find fault with someone either way, but I think it is one of those things that we talked a little bit earlier about crosses to bear, and that could be one that someone may need to bear a little bit.
I see. Let's take a moment for a word from our sponsor. A lot of us have a lot of downtime right now, And there's been no better time to start a new audiobook with a free trial from Audible. You get a free audiobook of your choice that you get to keep, even if you decide not to continue with their service. So far as books you can check out, I'd recommend looking into Luther's Bondage to the Will. That's on Audible that you can pick up as your free audiobook. But if you don't like that one, you can always choose a different one from their plethora of options. So go ahead and go to lutherancartographer.com/audible to get your free audiobook today. Let's get back to our guest. All right, so we've started to talk about this. Tell us a little bit more about what it's like to be Lutheran in your area. You've already mentioned that you've got a good number of congregations in the area, though not dwarfed by the Mormon population, of course. But what's it like being Lutheran in Salt Lake?
Yeah, it is lonely. It really is. I sometimes I'm jealous to listen to some of your other guests to hear like, oh yeah, you meet people at the grocery store all the time, and everybody kind of knows each other. And the life of a Lutheran in Utah and in Salt Lake is mostly you see your people when you sit in the pew. That's it. You go to the altar together, and that's when you see them, and that may be it for the week. In some places, like some of the folks who you've talked to from the sort of southern quarters, they will say, yeah, there's Baptist churches everywhere. On every corner you've got Baptist churches or Reformed churches or whatever. Here there are absolutely Mormon churches on every block, and they not only have one service as we would understand it, they have multiple congregations in each building, and they will do multiple services from 9 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. They'll just rotate people in and out. It's all the time. I have had the good fortune, actually, I'm glad that I'm kind of blessed to have the opportunity to talk to you about it, because this past year I actually took the opportunity to visit a number of the LCMS parishes here in the circuit, because we were working up to the March for Life event that we did here in Salt Lake City back in January. So as part of that run-up, I decided to submit myself as a spokesperson to go from my congregation, to go from Grace Church and School to each of these parishes. And I got to visit and talk to our pastors and meet some of the lay people and just kind of talk to them and worship with them and commune with them. And it was really awesome to see the degree of care and respect that our pastors here have for the liturgy and for the body and blood of Christ and for the confession and absolution. And I made sure to tell those folks, even the language of our church, when we sit in the sanctuary, there are two parts to the sanctuary, right? There's the chancel, and then there's the nave, right? And we know where nave comes from. It comes from the word for boat. We are all like Noah and his family, sitting in our little boats, adrift, waiting for God to set us down wherever we will go. And I sort of used that analogy when I talked to the brothers and sisters that I visited and said, we are each in this state of Utah, in this valley, in our circuit, we are all in our own little boats, and we're all sort of floating. And I said to them, it'd be kind of nice to just make contact and bump the hulls a little bit from time to time, and get to talk to one another. And that's something that we don't get a lot of, really. I mean, it really is, you kind of stick to your parish, and you stick to your pastor, and you stick to your people. And every time you leave, you're going back out into the mission field. And I think we all, as Lutherans, experience that to some degree or another. But it is stark when you leave the when you leave the parking lot at your congregation. It's like, wow, okay, this is different. And the interesting thing, I specifically want to bring this up too, because as somebody who has been Mormon in the past, I have kind of become the de facto go-to guy. The interesting thing that you might not expect about Lutherans and actually Christians of various stripes in this setting is that we live shoulder to shoulder with with the LDS people, but we seem to know very little about them. And just one quick story I'll share is that they don't refer to their congregations as congregations. They refer to them as wards. They have their own language. And a new couple that had moved here to Utah, and actually they'd been here quite a while, but they said, oh yeah, one time we were taking a walk in our neighborhood and there were some little signs posted for the Ward family picnic. And they thought, oh, well, that's nice that the Ward family would invite us to their picnic. And so they followed the signs and ended up at this Mormon church. And they said, wow, the Ward family must have a ton of people in it, not realizing that they were actually going to the congregation picnic for this Mormon church. And I sometimes use the analogy, I'm sure that everybody is familiar with Harry Potter, right? Well, in Harry Potter, you have the wizarding people and you have the muggles, and ostensibly they are a mixed demographic. They live shoulder to shoulder, but you have the normal muggle people who are like, oh, magic is so wonderful and amazing, and we know nothing of this. But then you have the wizarding people who are like, oh, the muggles are fascinating. I hear that they have this mechanism called a bicycle, and look, you can ride on it, and that's a little bit what it's like here. Sometimes when we have Mormons visit our congregation, they'll say, oh, well, is this your ward? And we'll say, well, yes, it is our ward. And I will field questions from a lot of my brothers and sisters about kind of just the little kind of day-to-day questions of, what do they do over there, and they're all wearing ties, and what do they do in the temples, and what's this all about? And not even the really arcane stuff, but just kind of the day-to-day stuff. And that's not just for you folks listening to this. I mean, it's not just for people who have never met a Mormon, but it is for us who live here in Utah. We just don't mix the waters that much, so to speak, and I think that presents some challenges for ministry, and we are working as a circuit. In fact, we're going to be calling a specific ministry pastor as a missionary here to do ministry specifically to Mormons and to help educate us about how to talk to those folks and how to proclaim the true gospel of Christ. It is extra difficult, especially when they, as a faith, they will say, oh yeah, we believe in the Bible, as long as it's translated correctly. And then, of course, there are a whole lot of caveats for that. And so they end up with a lot of terminology that we have, but they tend to mean a lot of different things by it. All the way down to the word gospel means something different to them than it means to us. And so as Lutherans, it is a little bit lonely, but it is also a very stark contrast, and it helps to focus us on the cross, which is not a focus, in this prevailing culture here. The cross is not a symbol of Christ's crucifixion or resurrection. It's not, it doesn't really mean the same thing as it does to us. And so it really helps to, I think, fix our eyes on the cross and to give us comfort in the means of grace that are given to us in our confession and absolution and in the body and blood that we receive at the altar. So it is... in my particular case, I tell people, you don't have to be an apostate to really understand the Orthodox faith, but it doesn't hurt. So,
I didn't quite catch that. What do you mean?
Oh, just that, for what we call cradle Lutherans, right? So Nicholas, you were born and raised Lutheran, right? So
more or less, yeah.
More or less, yeah. So for you, it's kind of business as usual, right? This is Christianity. This is what it is. For someone like me who has seen the distinction and who sees, kind of what the differences are, I just find that, and this is a gift that God has given to me in kind of some weird ways, but it means that I, sort of in a weird backward way, I just feel like I have such a strong appreciation for the things that might otherwise be taken for granted.
I see.
That makes sense.
Yeah, you appreciate it more, having been deprived of it for so long.
Yeah, and you don't have to go that route, is what I'm saying. But it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt.
I see. Okay. So for the kind of the stereotypical view of Utah is that it's very family friendly, very straight laced. What is it really like to raise a family there? Is there some truth to that stereotype?
Yeah, I think there is, and I think that is one of the positive things that can come from a culture as it is here. I mean, it is definitely very family-oriented. Mormonism in particular is very focused on the idea, for example, that families can be together forever is something that you hear from Mormons, and we would have a little bit of a different take on that. But what it means is that focus on family-based institutions are emphasized here. The public school system, even though I would tell you to send your children to a good Lutheran parish school, parochial school, you should do that. But the public school system is a big focus here. They work very hard to train teachers and to, even down to the culture, that you experience as a child. I mean, one of the things about having an essentially kind of an innocent or sort of a whitewashed culture here is that you end up with a very sort of, I kind of like to say that in Utah, we have a very nerdy proclivity here. I mean, we have things like Comic Con, and we actually have, like, I think it's like the third biggest version of Comic Con is here in Salt Lake, once or twice a year. And growing up as a kid, you get into things like Monty Python and the Holy Grail, or a lot of Star Wars, or your make believe just tends to be a lot more innocent and kind of fun and goofy and nerdy. And that is something that I benefited from anyway as a child, and it may be different now for my kids. I think the rest of culture may be catching up with us here, unfortunately. But I would say that yeah, there are some actual benefits, some kind of halo effects, I guess, that you might say, that come from living in a culture that really does value its morality. I think you do get some benefit from that. Yeah,
I see. So Napoleon Dynamite is kind of that nerdy kid that kind of is a picture in some ways of what it kind of the direction of the culture.
I love that reference, Nicholas. Great callback to Napoleon Dynamite. Yeah, it is absolutely like that. And and not everybody, and it may be that your personality may dictate that a little bit more than the culture at large, but in some ways we do have a little bit of a cultural bubble for the better and the worse, I think. But it means that raising a family, you can take some things a little bit more for granted, that the culture that surrounds you values the rearing of children and the preservation of the family unit, which I don't think that's something that you really do get everywhere else in the country.
That makes sense. All right, so let's say that we've got somebody that's thinking about moving to Salt Lake or is just passing through on vacation. What things to do or things to see or places to eat would you recommend?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So there are a couple places that I always recommend, just kind of for fun when it comes to, especially if you're going to be in Salt Lake in particular. And I mentioned the Wasatch Front, and there's all kinds of stuff to do along. It's basically this one continuous kind of suburban metro kind of sprawl. So anywhere along here, going all the way from the city of Ogden up in the north, all the way down to Provo and Orem to the south. There's just a ton of stuff to do. We have aquariums that are here, believe it or not. We've got a really great zoo. Hogle Zoo is here, and I know that there are zoos you can get anywhere else, but we do have a good zoo here. Restaurants and things like that. There's actually a great place that's up on the university campus. We have a local pizza chain that's called The Pie, and they have one particular... Whenever I have friends in town, they have one particular location that is actually in a basement, sort of in this little, I mean, it's almost like a little speakeasy kind of pizza place, but you go down into like this little bomb shelter area, and the whole place is just covered up with kind of wholesome graffiti, people signing things and drawing little pictures and stuff like that. And you just have this great little pizza place that's down underground. It's called The Pie Underground, there on the University of Utah campus. And it's a nice casual spot. You don't have to get dressed up for it, and it's just kind of a fun little experience. And so I'll tell people to go there too. But we have a number of, believe it or not, we actually have some sort of brewery restaurants. There's a place that's closer to where I live in Sandy, which is to the south of Salt Lake, that's called the Bohemian. And it is a sort of Prussian... I don't even know if you call it Prussian cuisine, but it's sort of like the kind of stuff you'd have in the Czech Republic or in Prague or something like that. And you can order some nice drinks with that and get some schnitzel and those kinds of things. And so if you're a good, by heritage, a good German Lutheran, we've got some good places for you here in town as well. While you're here, you may as well stop by the LDS Temple. I mean, it's at least worth having a look at. It's nothing like you would see in the cathedrals of Europe or those kinds of things. And actually, here's an interesting little tidbit that if you happen to go to the Mormon Temple and to the Visitor Center, they have a statue that they have sort of co-opted as sort of their branding, and you may have seen it. It's a statue of Christ with his arms outstretched, and it's kind of this marble-looking thing. That is actually a copy of a Lutheran statue that is originally in a cathedral in Copenhagen, Denmark. I think it's in Denmark. And so we actually, when I found out about that, because I'm like, oh yeah, that statue again, and I was like, where did that come from anyway? And it turns out that it's actually a replica of a Lutheran statue, and I wish I could remember the name of it off the top of my head. But you can come and take a look at that and point and say, hey, we can lay claim to that. That's one of our good Lutheran statues there. Yeah, that's right. We also have here things like the Kennecott Copper Mine, which is from what I understand, the world's largest man-made hole that you can see from outer space. So you can take a look at that. And then, of course, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, all the natural features. And it's fun. I'll tell you, in winter it's fun to see people traveling from places that don't have snow, places further south. You can always tell when you've got a visiting family because they've got a car parked out to the side of a snowbank and they're just petting the snow, and they have their kids kind of rolling around in it. Hey, look, this is snow. Pet it. Yeah, look, there it is. But yeah, we have a ton to do here, and we actually have a very active tourism board, and they have a lot of good suggestions for you. But we got good camping, good things to do. Simply, the Utah Symphony is here, and all kinds of theater. Hale Center Theater is a nice. They just renovated and built a nice new theater system, and it's one of those theaters in the round kind of things, and they do some really creative stuff with that too. And I've taken my kids to that, and that's just a joy to go to as well. So if you hear this and you're looking for something to do and none of that stuff immediately strikes you as, yeah, I want to do that, hit me up. Let me know. I'll give you some suggestions.
Good deal. All right. So now as we start coming to the end of the podcast, I want to make sure that I give you the opportunity to point our listeners to different things, places to follow you online, your church's website. What would you like to point our listeners towards?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, especially in this time, and who knows how long our current exile will go on from our churches, but one of the things that we've done pretty far ahead of the game, we've actually been doing a live stream of both our church service and our Bible studies on the Grace Lutheran YouTube page. And funny thing about that is that we are actually the Grace Lutheran. Of all the Grace Lutherans in all the world, if you go to youtube.com/C for channel /Grace Lutheran, you'll find our channel there. And
wow.
You can find my pastor, Pastor Tony Massinelli, who is best pastor I've ever met, catechized me and is just a really faithful guy, gives a really great sermon. You can see his sermons there all the way back to Holy Week 2 years ago. We actually started that, and we haven't missed one since then. And I probably need to go back and trim some of those down. If you want to see the whole liturgy, they're still there. You can actually see what kind of a church we are and how we handle the liturgy. Very liturgical church. We do hymns. Even when we have our guitar and piano, we still do the hymns from the hymnal. And I think you'd love to come and sit with us and worship. We have a lot of other congregations here. We actually have a Concordia Education Center. So if you happen to be here when the seminaries send their professors out to the various places, you can actually come and get a seminary class here as well. But you can also find our website for Grace Lutheran Church and School. That's gracesandy.org. As for me personally, I am most active on probably Twitter, I would say. I am at Jeremy_Lamont. That's Lamont on Twitter. And I'm generally talking about either theology or video games. Those are sort of my two loves. I am also on Facebook, and if you're listening to this, I absolutely welcome you to send a friend request. I mostly post things publicly, but my profile itself is private, but come friend me on Facebook, Jeremy Lamont. I think it's jeremy.lamont.12 or something like that, but you'll find me, I'm sure. And then apart from that, I actually have some little projects of my own that are a little more secular in nature, but I mentioned my love of video games, and believe it or not, Nicholas, I can fully appreciate and understand your podcast project here, which I find so fascinating. It's really been a joy to listen to it, because I actually run 2 different podcasts myself. I think everybody has a podcast these days, so I figured I'd one-up everybody and do 2 of them. One of them is called The Game Bites Show, which is a twice-weekly podcast about news of video games, and we sort of talk about, my co-host and I talk about the video games that we've been playing and just kind of keep people apprised of current events with respect to video games. And then we also do an episode where we talk about, topics of discussion, games that we've been playing, things like that. So that's over at GameBitesShow.com. It's a very low-budget looking website, but I'm real proud of that podcast. And if you are into the nerdier side of things, GameBitesShow.com is a place that you can get a fix for that. On top of that, I have a second podcast because I'm just that much of a masochist, and it is about video game music, specifically that is released on vinyl records. Nicholas, did you know that vinyl records are coming back? Did you realize that?
I had heard that they were cool and that they were coming back, yes.
They are back. They're back, and they're so cool that I specifically collect and specialize in video game soundtracks that are pressed to vinyl record, and I do a whole podcast about that, and that one is more like twice monthly. That one is called Video Game Grooves, if you see what I did there, and you can find that at videogamegrooves.com. And that's me.
Fantastic. So, dear listener, go ahead and check all that stuff out. You can find links to all those things that Jeremy just mentioned on our show notes page. That'll be at lutherancartographer.com/27. All right. So before we I asked my final question. I do want to ask you really quick, what new video game are you playing or are you most excited to play?
All right. you just pressed my button, so I'm gonna... Great question. So I will tell you that the best value right now in video games, if you have a PC or an Xbox, is Microsoft has something called the Xbox Game Pass, which allows you to play sort of a la carte, a little bit like Netflix of video games. And the nice thing is that they will release brand new releases as part of that service. And for those of you who grew up with a Sega Genesis, you may have heard of a little game called Streets of Rage, which was sort of an urban brawling, knuckle combat fighting kind of game. And these days, retro is in, and they've just released Streets of Rage 4, brand new, this week as of recording, but it is available as part of that Xbox Game Pass subscription, and it is a trip. It takes you way back, and these days when people make good games, they basically take all of the best parts of old video games and smooth over the frustrating stuff, and you end up with a real good finished product. So if you are so inclined, check out Streets of Rage 4 on the Xbox One or on PC, and if you want to play co-op with someone, you can hit me up as well. I'm also on Xbox Live. Check me out on Twitter or on Facebook, and we'll arrange something. We'll beat up some thugs together.
Excellent. Jeremy, what are your parting thoughts for our listeners today?
Well, I like I said, I really have come to appreciate over the last several years the clarity and the comfort of the Lutheran confession. Having been in, like I said, having been in those pews for 15 years as a perpetual guest, thinking that, oh yeah, this church is fine, but maybe the church down the road is fine, or, whatever, it doesn't really matter. I commend strongly to anybody who hears this to spend a little bit of time in the Book of Concord and look at the Lutheran confessions, look at the church fathers, look at the reformers, look at, we are blessed to have had Martin Luther to essentially bring us the gospel again from the state of things in the 1500s. There is a reason that God has brought you to Lutheranism, or if you're listening to this and you're not Lutheran, God will bring you to Lutheranism. You should check it out. For me, it was really important in my sort of awakening to this to realize that the church was bigger than just the four walls of my sanctuary. To realize that at Synod, for example, we have a bunch of great pastors and great professors and great teachers just working really hard to bring each and every one of us to a better and fuller understanding of our faith and our confession. Take that seriously. Spend a little bit of time in the small catechism. Bring that to your children too. There's a saying that God has no grandchildren. If you are a parent and you're listening to this, it's hard, I know, to get your kids to be excited about faith sometimes. They don't reckon with law and gospel. They don't reckon with their sin. But I guarantee you that as they get older and they look back on the effort and the frustration of trying to help to impart that knowledge to communicate to them the assurance of your salvation through faith by the grace of God, it is worth it. And the more that you can delve deeply into that, there are a lot of great resources out there. And I want to thank you, Nicholas, also, even as a very engaged layperson, to help to highlight that just by looking at different folks in the church and in fellowship with us from around the country, and just kind of being aware that there's a whole world that God has given us in which he is glorified, in which he brings us the good news of our salvation. And so that, I think, is my parting words for you, is to keep your eyes open and to really appreciate the beauty and the comfort of a steadfast Lutheran confession.
Amen. Thank you again. God's peace.
God's peace to you, Nicholas. Thanks again for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Lutheran Cartographer. For more about the things that we talked about today, check out the show notes page at lutherancartographer.com/27. Before you go, I encourage you to check out that Audible offer. That's at lutherancartographer.com/audible. You get a free audiobook to check out that trial, and you get to keep it even if you decide not to go forward with their service. Until next time, I'm Nicholas Weber. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.